Okay, it looks like we are almost there.
It says live on the screen. It says live on YouTube right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we're right here, Rock. It's just connecting on my end, but looks like we're set.
All right, let's get started then, huh? Because don't want to keep everybody too much.
Sounds good.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Abe Duque. I am an instructor at 343 Labs. I know a lot of you. I know of a lot of you as well. I have had interactions with many of you, the ones that I see that are in the chat. So I'm happy you guys came to listen to me ramble a little bit about one of my favorite subjects in the whole world, which is mixing and mastering. Today I was asked to talk about fundamentals of mixing and mastering, which is a very broad topic. We can, what do I really talk about? I thought to myself when I was preparing for this talk, and I figured that I'd go to something that I think is probably the most important thing that I can imagine in becoming an audio engineer, which is the mindset of the audio engineer and what it takes to get yourself into that mindset. And this is actually when I teach my classes, is probably one of my biggest mandates and reasons for being in the classroom with my students, which is to teach them how to become audio engineers, and more like teaching somebody how to fish, and so that way they can learn, they can feed themselves for the rest of their lives instead of handing somebody a fish. And it is something of a remarkable shift in your brain that has to happen, especially if you spend a lot of time being having another role. So, up until this point, I think a lot of people might consider themselves what you call a producer. Now, a producer, I've been around forever. Maybe I don't look like it, but I've been around since I've been in studios since the 80s, middle 80s, late 80s. And at that time, working in studios, one thing was obvious. It was never a point where somebody was working alone. There was always at least two or three or four people in the studio doing the work. There was always a producer or a couple of people that were, given that role of production. But the name of the a producer, or the title of producer, went to somebody who basically had the title of what you might call today a project manager. But as time went on, and things got more and into the box, meaning now we have laptops that can do everything that happened in studios. Something kind of unfortunate happened, meaning that all these roles that were always assigned to different people and kept us together in studios working on music together became assigned to one person. So producer has many tasks. Um, it's like maybe writer, arranger now, sound designer, even to the point beyond that, to like going on to being a promoter and a booking agent for your act, for yourself, if you're the act. So, the producer has now become, now known as a different, the term producer has been changed to something else. When I first started, it was not like that. It was a totally different scenario. Uh, people, Producer was a person that knew how to manage other people and make sure the job got done. So there was a writer, and there was a and maybe a recording engineer, and maybe uh, you know, an arranger, even a sound designer, musicians of all sorts. They would all come together, and the producer would just make sure that everybody got everything done. Once the producer was done with their task, then the project would be bundled together and then sent over to an audio engineer who would mix down the project. And then once the audio engineer got done, then another engineer took over, which was the mastering engineer. Um, so even then, there was a kind of a barrier between the producer and what happened after, the audio engineer that went to mixing the track, and then the one that went to mastering the track. So what's happened today is that now being the producer that has to have all of those things in their head, and perform all these tasks, again gets to that point, but usually stops at that that barrier that is the mixing part of things. Now, producers try to mix; they do their best job at mixing, but I think it boils down to a few things, but mainly it's just the mindset of a producer has a hard time breaching into what the mindset of an audio engineer should be. And it's quite different from that of the production phase, that one, the audio engineer production. I mean, the audio engineer mindset. The production phase is full of like things like hope and euphoria and exploration, outcome gratification, creativity, and some skills with software, putting it together. We're always learning how to like, work the software. Some people learn it reluctantly just because they have to and have no other, way to record or get their music down. So they just kind of learn what they have to in order to like be able to express themselves musically. But engineers think differently. Uh, Engineers have a very different mindset. They're actually first of all they're agnostic to the creative content of the music. So what I mean by this is that they're not really emotionally tied to what the sound is doing. So a lot of the times, sometimes what I'll get in my audio engineering classes or mixing and mastering classes is people will come in and feel that it's a continuation of the production process. So they'll play me the music and be disappointed when they don't hear feedback that's based on, well, what you do with your arrangement, or how should you perfect the melody somehow, or something of that sort, because there has to be a line drawn, because you have to, as an audio engineer, you have to take on this kind of new role of that's purely based on science. And they're really the Spocks of the music industry. They really don't want to hear it about anything that makes them happy or sad about the music. They just want to work towards the target. And it's very procedure based, and they use instrumentation even to measure their process, I mean, and their process and their progress. So take an audio engineer's one of the favorite tools of an audio engineer, and this is like in contrast to what a producer would be, is a spectrum analyzer. A producer rarely, if I mean, in my experience, working with a lot of producers and working with a lot of audio engineers, a producer rarely thinks of the spectrum analyzer as like the main number one plugin or that they can use. But an audio engineer can't live without a spectrum analyzer. And just like that, there's all sorts of tools that an audio engineer uses that really doesn't fall into the mind of the producer to grab. Producers are more interested in what better plugin can I have? How can I make some sound design happen that's a little better? How can I create a better or more captivating melody or something of that sort? So it's science based. Emotion is removed completely from the process. And well, in the best case scenario, it should be. Creativity is limited to negotiating the challenges that arise from in the manipulation of the audio to successfully match the target. So you have a target as an audio engineer. Now, what is the target that you have as an audio engineer? Well, it could be, that's also another thing that teaches you, good audio engineers learn to detach themselves from what they think should be a great outcome, because their target, if they're working for a client, their target is to make that client happy. And if that client is not happy, no matter what you think about the outcome, like if I went off and grabbed your project and started to mix it, and just did it because the way that I thought it should sound, the way that I think it should be balanced and EQ'd and so forth, and then presented it to you, I might be wasting my time, because in the end, you might come back and, as my client, you might come back and be like, hey, that that's just not what I was thinking. And that's why the reference track or set of reference tracks that you should be requiring from your clients is a big deal, because you have to understand where their head is, and what you're trying to match, and what your target is, and what you got to work with, and how can you bridge that and make that happen. And that's all that really is going in there. And this is what turns on audio engineers. it's not, how moving the pieces they're working on. Incidentally, it's hard to kind of not notice how something might be moving or whatever, but still, this is not the role. The role is to find balance, to create depth and clarity. Damage control is a really big thing, like being able to put things into a place where, to make things right when they've been neglected, let's say, by the producer for lack of knowledge of how to manage them or such, and then in the end maximizing the client's vision. So but now here's the situation now. Now I'm talking still as if there's two different people going on. Like there's one producer, and then there's one engineer. Uh, what if you're the same person? So if you're the same person, this becomes a very, very hard thing to manage in your head, because you have to be able to be in that euphoric, sort of fun, happy, place where you make music and where you express yourself, and also have a very calculated, cold, very stoic approach towards working on your sound. I guess this is why you hear often that, yeah, you shouldn't be mixing your own records. I bet all of you have heard that either at one point or another. You shouldn't be mixing or mastering your own records. And I guess maybe this is the biggest reason why you should consider not mixing your own records. Is because the question is, I guess, then, can you make the separation? Can you remove yourself from the connection that you have, emotionally speaking, to the material? Or can you just detach yourself and be completely agnostic suddenly? If you can manage that, then you can get the job done right. I'll give you an example that happens to me often, and it happens to me over and over again. I'll make a great kick drum. Sometimes I love making sound design, doing sound design, and I'll make a kick drum that I think, oh, this is an amazing kick drum. I make a lot of different types of music, but a lot of times I make like techno and house or whatever. So I'll make this really beautiful kick drum that I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a killer kick drum. So I start writing music around this kick drum. Let's say I'm making a techno track. In the techno track, a kick drum is almost everything, right? So you start laying on parts, and then you get inspired and you go in this other direction, and things start to go and roll. And then you have this whole big thing. Now you're kind of happy with everything, but somewhere through the whole process, the kick drum and where that all started kind of got sucked into the rest of the track. So now you're trying to mix this track, and you do your best to figure out that, well, it sounds pretty good, and maybe you convince yourself that it sounds great, but then you go to listen to something else that you respect, some other type of music that's related to the music you're listening to now or trying to make now, and then you realize, oh no, this is not up to par. The mix is not the same. It doesn't feel as full. It doesn't feel like the kick drum itself doesn't feel like it's punching through. It doesn't feel like things are working. And then you try everything, every trick you could imagine, everything you can to like just get that kick drum and make it work out for you. But you refuse to let go of the part or the sound because you're so in love, or at least I have been so in love with the sound. And it's the funniest thing, especially with dance music, like house music and techno music. But I think it goes to most music that has importance, lays importance on the kick drum. That if you switch out kick drums, you can easily, maybe, sometimes it's easier to like have a place setter kick drum, and then at the end of your whole production, just switch out kick drums until you find one that matches perfectly. And then when it's so funny because whenever I decide to do that, suddenly the kick drum that I didn't even know existed fills in the space and becomes, the thing that I needed in the mix. And with these types of mixes like techno and house and any electronic based music, the kick drum can be up to, I would say, 50% of the whole mix. You can repair or damage a mix just like that with a kick drum. Not to just talk about this type of music, but what I'm I guess I'm getting at is the idea that if you're married to something, if you're very emotionally invested in something, it's hard to be pragmatic and agnostic about it, and to make sometimes very harsh calls that you need to be making. The same thing goes for like tons of layering that you might be making. You think that, you just convince yourself and you put yourself in a space that you think this is the best, and maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And an engineer sitting by your side, or someone to look at that later, might know straight off the bat what, because they have no emotional tie to the whole thing. Anyway, I'm going to give you guys a chance now. If you guys have any questions about what I've said so far, I have plenty more to talk about and some examples that I want to get to. But if you guys have any questions now, it'd be a good time to jump in if you'd like. If not, I can keep on going.
I have a quick question, Abe, if
Yeah.
nobody else. So when you're talking about, how important like one aspect of a mix could be, like for example, the kick drum. If you have like a song you're working on, because I found myself in this position many times, that you're pretty happy with the overall sound, but the mix just isn't sounding right and something's just kind of off. What's your suggestion to like fix that, or what's the starting point to kind of get yourself out of, a bad mix and transitioning towards maybe something that's sounding better or nicer?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a bad mix.
Hmm.
So, does a bad mix means that you just haven't paid any mind? Now, in my classes, when you come and take my class, I usually teach people a map to, a procedural map that you have to kind of go through with every part to prep them to be even just able to meet each other in the mix. So if you
Yeah.
haven't done that part of it, and that begins with reductive EQ, and there's like at least four considerations that you have to get in mind when you talk about reductive EQ. And then if it's a part that you've recorded raw, like maybe just you singing or whatever, then you might have to deal with compression and what type of compression you're going to be using. I always just recommend series compression because I think it's maybe the best way to go with compression. But then, once that's prepped, then those things could start meeting each other. And once they meet each other, then you can start to establish the balance. Now, if you haven't done that, you can call that a bad mix because none of the prep work has been done.
Got
And the prep work can be very tedious. The prep work, the reductive EQ that needs to be done can be very tedious. Looking for resonant frequencies, searching out sibilants, which is those very very shrill S sounds that come from certain vocals, or even hi hats, or even snares and such can carry that stuff. Uh, if you don't put those things in check, also if it's bass information, you want to take the low end and maybe put that, like the subs, put that into mono so that you can prevent maybe phasing issues. What else is there? Maybe even reduce some of the low end that you don't need. That way you clear up some of that energy, making it easier to balance things out. Kind of relieving the pressure on the whole mix, so the mix comes up and becomes a little more easier to manage, and
it.
it's not pulled down by energy that you're not using. I mean, you know that your hearing can only go down to 20 hertz, and speakers, most of you, one of the things I challenge everybody to do that's listening to us right now is to go and look at the reference monitors that they have, and to look at the specs for your reference monitors and check what it is that they actually can do. How low can they go? And you'd be shocked to hear or see and hear the fact that they won't go very well. Some of them, it'd be a miracle if you can get them to go under 35 hertz,
Mhm.
or even 40 hertz. And so people think, well, range of human hearing 20 hertz, maybe I can get some speakers that'll go down there. They don't. So those speakers can't carry that. You can't hear it. And then a lot of the times you carry these frequencies that are in the single digits in hertz, on some things like that you absolutely don't need it on, like a hi-hat. So you record a hi-hat, right, with a microphone, and you fail to like put roll off the low end on that hi-hat when you record it. And now you hear the hi-hat sound that you've recorded and you feel that sounds great, but you don't realize, and this is where the spectrum analyzer comes into play, you don't realize that, with the spectrum analyzer will show you that you have all these deep low frequencies that are like eating up all the energy in your mix. And I like to say that mixing a record, or well, the task of doing so is like managing an energy economy. And you got to be able to like cut down the inefficient use of energy, and that's certainly a way to do it. So, so there's at least four considerations in reductive EQ, and then that carries on and goes into the type of compression that you're going to apply, and how much is needed, and is it needed at all. And then once that's to that point, now we could start to blend those things together and create a balance. Now, the thing is, if you we're talking about what is a bad mix, if you hadn't done any of that, then I think you're already in a bad mix.
Exactly.
So if you've done a lot of that, and then you try to balance things out, then you're in a challenging mix. So challenging mixes happen for a lot of reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons a challenging mix is going to happen is because uh, you have too many parts. So, like I always say that the easiest thing you'll ever have to mix, if you had a mixing job to do, is a jazz trio. If somebody said, "Hey, I have this jazz trio. We just did some recordings, and would you want to take that job on?" I would take it with my eyes closed. I'd be like, "Yes, please." Because I know it'll be so easy to get that done. Why? Because there's not that many elements. There's an upright bass, there's maybe a piano, and maybe a snare and a hi-hat, and if there's a tom in there, so you have maximum 6 or 7 elements to have, or tracks inside of your mix, and every element is basically having its own place on the frequency spectrum. So you're like, oh, well, this is very easy because everything is, having its own spot, and nothing is competing with each other. Everything is just ready to go. Everything is just, it's just really finding some leveling, which is not the hardest thing to do. But the harder mix, the more challenging mix, is going to be the mix that has all sorts of things on top of each other. So you get mixes. I've seen mixes. I mean, I haven't seen these lately, but I remember when I used to teach at Dubspot, a kid came in one time with a mix that had 140 tracks. 140 tracks. Okay. And they were all doing something at one point or another, and it was, and now imagine you have to make 140 tracks, and you have three bass lines, and four kick drums, and all sorts of other stuff, and they're all kind of overlapping in one way or another. And now you're trying to get that to have some clarity. This is tough. This is really tough. This is a challenging mix. This could be almost an impossible Herculean task to perform, because you have, so as if while you're still in the producer mindset, you should really start to prep yourself for the time that you have to mix this. And I always tell my students in my class that mixing should begin as soon as you start production. And if you start to practice some of these habits of like maybe curating your material so it's really the absolute necessary stuff and that's it, that nothing more than the necessary things need to be in there. And in production, I usually, in my production classes, I also teach production. I usually try to get students, when they come in, I usually have everybody play their stuff. There's always playing of stuff, and then I can give them the feedback of the arrangement and the feedback based on melodies and arcs and whatever. But when that's going on, I can see when, or feel or figure out that there's maybe too many elements in there. And I always challenge them to, let's try to remove some parts here to see how it sounds. And one of the most amazing things that happen in their brains is their brains click and they realize, wow, less really is more when it comes to music. That taking out stuff actually makes things bigger somehow, all the time, not sometimes, all the time. So prepping the way that you produce for the mix that's to come is an amazing thing to do, because once you get to the mixing process of or part of the whole thing, you won't be faced with like all this nightmare scenarios of having to mix all these things that really don't belong there, maybe even. If you think they belong there, then, and it's justified, then we'll have to deal with it somehow, and then we'll have to apply some things to that. So yeah, does that answer your question, Thomas, about the bad mix?
Yeah, it really does. I think what you touched on is really, you got to prep your mix in order to get, some real progress going on. And the
Yeah.
other thing I was going to ask was you already answered it in your explanation, which is really in depth, but, do you encourage people to mix as they produce, which it seems like you're alluding to that you definitely would say to do so.
Well, I would say yes, especially the tedious basic work that needs to be done to every track, which is reductive EQ and the needed compression. That stuff should be done by the time you say, well, I'm done writing. All I need to do is just get a mix down on this and I'll be good. By that time, you should be already having all these things taken care of in every track. It'll even help you in your writing process because it'll change how things breathe in your track, and you'll feel, it. I mean, you take a preset or a sound that you really like. That sound, if it sounds great, you'll be inspired to write more music with it. The great preset will inspire you to write great music. So the same goes with the mix. If the mix is sounding, really like vibing with you, and you've got it going, you'll be writing on top of that and being more inspired to write on that because you'll be motivated. You'll be psyched about it. And so if you can get to that place where you know that you're not going to be writing anymore, and I always like to say that mixing, I mean, that the production should blend into the mixing process if you're the person doing it. If you're the guy or gal wearing the same hat, one hat for everything, right? Then production should go right into the mixing process. And after the mixing process is going in earnest, then the mixing process should blend into the mastering process as well. Just because of, well, we could talk about that as well. So, all right. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we actually just had a question come in from the Zoom chat, and this is from Jacob. So thank you to Jacob for submitting this. He says, if reductive EQ and compression is prep for the mixing process, then what exactly does the mixing process include? Is it just balancing volume, or what else does that
Well,
entail?
balancing volume would be a big deal. We're at that point we can now find a way to make everything kind of have their own place sonically. As mixing engineers, now I started talking about like the production mindset versus the mixing mindset. So in production, what you tend to do, and I do it as well, is because you get motivated or you get it really into it, you start to listen to things and you start really bopping your head and feeling it, and you tend to raise the volume and listen to things very loud, and go for it, right? You really go for it. When you get to the mixing process, you have to switch now to the mixing process mindset, to the audio engineer mindset, and things like there's something called the Fletcher-Munson curve. It's something, it came out of these studies that Bell Labs made earlier on when they were trying to set up phone lines across the country. And the Fletcher-Munson curve, and if you guys want to Google it, you can have a look at what it looks like. But it basically shows the frequency spectrum and our hearing and the way it responds or sensitivity to certain frequencies. And the big takeaway from the Fletcher-Munson curve is that if you listen to things very loud, so if you're playing music that's close, let's say the loudest you can hear something is let's say the pain threshold. So let's say just below the pain threshold, right? As you get closer to the pain threshold, the all the frequencies that you're listening to tend to even out, meaning that low frequencies, mid frequencies, high frequencies, they all sound fine. They all like kind of even out. And if you start to mix in this condition, if you start to mix in a very loud way, the way that you produce, you're never going to hit the nail on the head when it comes to balancing stuff out. So you will notice that real engineers, everybody that's a real engineer will know that I'm right about this, mix at a very ridiculously quiet level. They like you would come by while they're working and you'd be like, "What are you doing?" They work as quiet as they possibly can because the sensitivity that our ears have is it's amazing how sensitive our ears are. So at the pain threshold, right? That's the loudest sound we could listen to, and at the quietest sound that we can perceive, there are 12 orders of magnitude in how much it breaks down in sensitivity. So we have a ridiculous amount of sensitivity at very low levels, and at those low levels, we really can cap what the levels on every part of the frequency spectrum really mean. So so we need to be so switching to the from the producer mindset, which is like all motivated, making music, dancing to it, even getting into it, switching to an audio engineer, you become Spock suddenly, and you just goes very quiet, and you listen very quietly. And now, incidentally, you shouldn't do that right after you've been listening very loud because your ears will be mush. But you should be going right into that, maybe early in the morning, in the very first part of the morning, and listening super quietly to it. So, to finish off on the question, there's balancing. That's one thing. But then there are things like setting up, setting up like taking care of like damage control. Like there's like phase cancellations that could happen here and there. There are secret phase cancellations. Let me give you an example. Let me show you. I'm gonna share my computer and show you what I mean here. So I'm gonna share my Ableton screen. So most producers, I'll give you something that most producers just don't know, or don't I don't know why, but every time I get people in my class, I think I don't have yet to run into one person that understands even what phase cancellations are. So if we have, and I'll just try to explain it to you with demo. If I have an operator, which I can play here, and you can't hear, right? I got to switch this out to, you can hear that now, right? And as I said, my favorite and most audio engineers' favorite device is going to be a spectrum analyzer because it's going to show you what frequency you're dealing with, if there's any harmonics involved. Right now, this is pretty much a pure sine wave, one fundamental, and that's it. If I take that and I double it, so I'm going to make two of those, and I set it up so I can play them both at the same time. What I'm going to get is double the amplitude because they're exactly the same. So they're just twice as loud, double the amplitude. So I'm going to put these into a group, and having them in a group, I'm going to put a spectrum analyzer on the group. So there it is, it's our spectrum analyzer. And in Ableton, I'm allowed to delay one track from another. Now, what is phase or when something is out of phase? Well, something is in phase. They're right aligned time-wise with each other. So these on the timeline, these two parts, which are my hands right now, would be in phase. If it's a sine wave, the sine wave goes in this motion. So there's a peak and there's a trough down here, and there's a peak and there's a trough, right? And it repeats at a certain frequency. And if you have a sine wave, and pretend this is a sine wave, and then you have a copy of the sine wave, if it's exactly the same frequency and the same copy of the sine wave, and they're right on top of each other, and they're playing like they're playing right now, you're just going to get double the amplitude. That's what you get right now. But if I take one of the sine waves and time shift it out of phase in time so that the peak of it is matching with the trough of it, then we're going to get a cancellation. And it's basically like positive numbers added with negative numbers. What do you get? You get like +5 plus -5 equals 0, right? So basically that's what's going to happen. So if I take, let's say, this track, and I'll do it by samples maybe. I bring this down far enough, change the timing here far enough. I get to a point, and now I can search out a better place, but I'm already at an amazing place right now because what have I done? I've eliminated the sound. There's the sound is here, but at the master, I'm almost canceled out all the way. Now, if I found the right exact number, I'll find the point where it'll be canceled completely, but this is good enough for the demo right now. You have a phase cancellation happening right there, right there, and that's a bit of a problem now, because if I turn one back on, I mean one off, then the one sounds, but if I turn the other one on, they both are away. And this happens a lot in mixes, and most producers don't have a clue that this is going on. And it happens mainly when you use more than one microphone to record one thing, like say a snare or a guitar. So you'll have a guitar, you're recording it, and you have one mic on the sound hole, one up here, one over there in the room. And just because of the distance that the sound has to travel between these microphones, the phase will change, and the waves might get to a point where they're misaligned and create this type of cancellation. So you might have a situation where you're getting canceled out frequencies from something that it shouldn't be. And you have three recordings because you have three mics going on, but when the three are playing, they sound weaker than when one is playing. And you're like, why? Right? That's a problem. That's something that producers don't worry themselves about, but engineers, this keeps them up at night. This is what keeps them up at night. Let's try another thing. So right now we did a situation where we kind of changed the timing on it and we created phase. Okay, no problem. But here's one thing, and this one I guarantee you nobody has ever seen, or and if you have, you know what you're talking about. So everybody uses EQs, right? Everybody likes to use EQs. So this EQ here is actually not only an EQ, and what people don't understand about EQs is the EQs are a collection of tools, and basically in two categories. One category being the EQ, and the other category being filters. And filters and EQs are not the same thing. Filters and EQs are definitely, they're towards the same purpose and towards the same goal, which is to mold the frequency spectrum, but they get the job done in two different ways. And now the EQ gets the job done by, working with amplitude. So if we have a something like this, which is a low shelf, we can raise the amplitude or lower the amplitude, raise and lower. We have a low shelf and we have a high shelf, and we have other things of the sort. But if you were to take, let's say, this type of pattern, this is a filter, and the filter is not a function of amplitude; it's a function of phase, the thing we were talking about before. And what happens around this cutoff, there's like a phase, I like to call it a phase vortex, where things get phased out. So as you look, watch what happens. I have this on just one of them. I have it on the second one here. So I should be on the other one, there should be no EQ. Let me just confirm that's going on. So right. So now I'm bringing this EQ down, and sorry, this filter down towards the fundamental, and watch what happens pretty soon. Whoa, what has happened? There's been another phase cancellation. Now I could probably find a spot that's perfect where this will be completely canceled out. How did that get canceled out? We still have two powerful sine wave fundamentals here, but these two powerful sine wave fundamentals have been completely taken away from each other because they've been put out of phase. If I turn one off, it comes back. No matter which one I turn off, it comes back. So what I didn't even touch it. Yeah, you didn't touch it. That's right. There's a phase vortex around here. And all of you have used filters. And when you use filters, you don't realize that getting close to correlated material on another track is going to suffer and suddenly become phased out. This is not good. This is not good, because you'll be chasing your tail, trying to find frequencies, trying to boost frequencies, trying to make your low end cut better or play nice with each other, and you won't realize that you're actually working against yourself. So this is another example of what can happen when phase when phase cancellations are at play. And these are the things that engineers are totally dreaming and thinking about it at all times, trying to catch it all in the mix. And when they catch that stuff, they can have more decision making power towards getting a clearer and better mix. And in production, people rarely ever come up with this as something to even think about. Any questions?
So we had a few questions come in, one here in Zoom and then a couple on YouTube. So the first question we'll take from Zoom is from Chanel, and thank you for submitting this. I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding it, but maybe she can provide some more context and maybe you'll understand it better, Abe. But she says, how important is speaker headphone panning slash balance? How far to the left or right is shearing the feel good range of our ears? I'm not sure what that
All right, so I get the gist of what she's talking about. So there's the idea is that we have a very different experience when listening through headphones than when we're listening to speakers. Just think about it. You have two little speakers pressed up against your ears, and that's that one experience. The next experience is that you have two big speakers or smaller speakers or whatever size speakers in a room, and the best position you could be is maybe an equilateral triangle setup. That's the best that you could imagine having, right? Uh, and now you're in that setup, and now panning in meaning where does the sound go, left or right, in the headphone is so absolute it disappears completely from this here and goes over here. Panning in speakers are not absolute, because if you pan it completely to the right, you're still going to hear it on both ears. You're just going to sense that it's coming more from that side. So two different situations altogether. Because of that, though, you have to understand that you have to use both headphones and speakers to mix your tracks in order to understand what's going to happen in both situations. Now, if you knew that your tracks were going to be exclusively listened to on headphones and nothing else, then you could just forget about listening to speakers and just mix for headphones. But if you and vice versa, if you knew that your tracks are going to only be played on speakers and never on headphones, then you could just throw away your headphones. But the fact of the matter is that we kind of have to deal with both. So we're both always playing, having this dance between both situations to kind of see how it's working between both. So I think that even though I mix mostly on speakers, I cannot leave my headphones out of the whole picture. I have to bring my headphones in. Even things like phase cancellations, which we were talking about now, which we don't think about. One of the things that we do in mixing is that we're going to take the subs and we're going to put them in mono. And the reason we put the subs in mono is because we don't want to have speakers in the room giving out sub frequency stereo stuff, which might be phase misaligned. And suddenly in the room, boom, there's a phase cancellation. And now that's the biggest disaster actually that could happen in a mix to your track, is that all the bass goes out, right? The same, but that won't happen in headphones. So if you have headphones on and you have sub stereo, your head is in between those two speakers, so you won't get those cancellations going. And you'll be like, "Whoa, that sounds great. That's fine." But won't realize that you're actually, walking right into a disaster, because as soon as it gets played in speakers, it's a time bomb. It's ready to go. So speakers are a really big way of listening and working in the studio, but not exclusively. Should you be working on speakers? You should be going between headphones and speakers and understand the why of both.
awesome. So
Sorry.
let's move on to another question that came in the chat here on Zoom, and this is from Maya. So thank you, Maya. Can we catch phase cancellation by grouping similar frequencies when mixing? She's saying, to help isolate the offending ones, and her example is maybe mids and vocals.
Well, I don't know exactly what she's talking about, but when you do work on things as a group, you do like just going back to like the thing that I had showed you with the correlated material being affected by by another filter, right? Um, that will be not an issue if you just work with the whole group. And of course, if you have everything in a group and you try to, get that working together and use maybe some sort of multi-band EQ situation or even multi-band compression, you might be able to balance things out better. But whenever you're in that situation, you have to realize you're in damage control mode again, that you got yourself in that situation because a few of the steps back, even all the way back to the production part of it, where you were deciding to lay out these elements that would mask each other later, uh, could have been a little better curated, and then later on maybe understanding that just the understanding, like I had one student recently in one of my mixing and mastering classes presented a trap a production, and was one of the best trap low end productions that I ever saw. And I was like, wow, the low end and the bass and the kick drum, they just everything is just killing it. And so I said, I got to figure this out. So we threw this up, and we were mixing it anyway. So of course I'm going to put a spectrum analyzer on it. What do I learn by putting a spectrum analyzer on it? Well, the kick was like something like, if I recall, like 46 hertz. Like not the kick, but the 808, what you call the 808, was like 46 hertz. And then the bass line was at a frequency that still matched in tuning with the kick, but it was slightly higher, in the 50s, or even maybe 60 or something like that. And then the kick drum was just even a little higher than that. So that you saw a distinctive spot between all those three low end elements had their own little place. And when that got going, and then there was some saturation that he had done that was also very, very interesting, because it added a couple of the right harmonics in the right place. But everything, including the saturation, had its own little spot. Trap music is not hard to mix because of that. The same reason that a jazz trio would not be hard to mix. They all, if you could find a place for everything, then you're good to go. The problem becomes is when you have so many things right on top of everything, like a big soup. You know, audio engineers like to think of themselves as like mystics or wizards or whatever, but there's a limit to the powers that you have as an audio engineer. And sometimes it's hard to explain that to people. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, it's fine. When we get it to the mixing, it's going to be great, and it's going to be all fixed there. Where I think that that shouldn't be the case, especially these days. We should be thinking, in a way that's going to be a holistic way of thinking, which means, you start your production, but you already have your mixing in mind as you start your production, and then you work on to the mixing part of it. Sorry, I should bring water for these things because
Yeah.
I'm a little parched. But do you have any other questions?
Yeah, so we just had another one from YouTube. It was a little while back, but thank you to the person who submitted it. And it goes back to a topic we talked a little about earlier on stream today, um, in the previous show. But they're saying, are you? It's a little hard to understand because of the grammar, but they said if you're trying to, mix on low budget monitors or, a not treated room, how is that going to affect you? And, another person in the chat on YouTube wrote, I have monitors, but I can't implement much acoustic treatment. So, do you have any bit of advice or, I don't know, just any thoughts
So
on?
yeah, sure. I have lots of thoughts on that. So knowledge is power, and knowing what you're dealing and what you're working with and with not without sorry with not is basically what's going to make you or break you sometimes in these situations. And what do I mean by that? So when you say a room needs treatment, right? What's going on there that makes that room need treatment? Well, two things. One could be, now it's all about reflections, right? So sound, bounces off surfaces. It bounces off hard surfaces more than it bounces off soft surfaces, and it gets absorbed by certain surfaces. And so the reflections that happen um, are going to cause one of two things. And one of those things is going to be phase cancellations. So what you might be working with is a situation, which would be unfortunate, that now imagine now 50 hertz, right? 50 hertz is like the magic frequency. That's the magic boom on the low end. So every drum and bass producer is shooting for that 50 hertz frequency, right? So 50 hertz. Imagine you have an unfortunate situation that right in the place where you sit, like here where I am, in this triangle between my speakers, the reflections in my room happen in such a way that that cancellations happen just exactly where I am right now because of the geometry of the way that 50 hertz bounced around. And right here where I am standing right now or sitting right now, they go away. And so now you're working with that and you're listening and you can't hear the low end and you're getting really frustrated. So what do? You crank up the low end more because you think that your mix doesn't have any low end. Oh, well, then you go somewhere else and listen to it, and suddenly the low end is so disturbingly loud, and it's like off-putting and not good. And you're like, oh, everybody loves low end, but there's a point where like low end is going to be like, hurting everything. So that's a bad thing. So that could happen, and that could happen not only in low end, but any frequency that happens to you in. And then the second thing that could happen to you is that maybe even the more insidious thing is that resonance occurs. So now imagine that the opposite has happened, that there's no cancellation where I'm sitting, but because of reflections and because of the way the geometry of the room is set up, I get a buildup of a frequency of, let's say, 50 hertz right where I'm sitting. And now with this buildup at 50 hertz right where I'm sitting, I'm confident by listening to my mix that I've got it going on. My mix is everything. It's all great. And well, what has happened? Now I take this mix and play it somewhere else. And what we listen and where's the bass? It's gone. It's not here. Why is the bass not here? Where I swear I put bass in there. Okay, so resonance and so now you need to know what's happening in your room. What's happening in your space. One of the best things I recommend to do, and this is one thing that I do have my students do earlier in the class, is have a sine wave sweep happen, meaning that they play a sine wave in their room and they take note of where the frequency. So if you start at a very low frequency and go high, just you could do that with operator. Could sweep the fine knob if you have Ableton. If not, any way of there's so many ways of creating sine wave sweeps. But a low frequency all the way through the room, and all the way to a high frequency, and just take note where the dips happened. So where did it just feel like it lost so much energy that was weird, and where did it like build up so much that it was like, hey, wait a second, none of the rest of the sweep is that loud, and then you'll understand at the position you're sitting at what is resonant and what is canceled, and you'll be able to have at least a better, a heads up on what you're dealing with. So if you know that information, you could start to do something about it. You could either start to figure out how to like treat your room, or maybe even just compensate in your mix for something that is going to be different in another space. So if you take if you're missing low frequency when you hear it because of a phase cancellation, I mean, or extra resonance because you're getting fooled by the resonance, you can, add a little more than you think because you know that that's going to be equal, that out there. So you basically have to set up a relationship between your speakers, your room, and your ears to know what it means like out there. If you can't afford, because good treatment is expensive, if you can't afford good treatment, then you're going to have to work with trying to compensate for those issues. A good way to mitigate a lot of that is to switch to headphones and see what's happening in your headphones, because headphones will always kind of be there how they should be. And if you get used to working with a certain pair of headphones, things are going to, be going to work out just all right. So headphones to the speakers. Now, people think that the speakers are the big component. They are very important. Of course, you could spend a lot of money on very nice speakers. I have 3 sets of speakers set up in here. I switch between them all while I'm mixing, and that's all well and good. But if you would really think about what could you do to have. We had a question earlier in the last stream we did where somebody had a pair of HS8s, and they were working with those HS8s, and they wanted to know if they should spend the money and upgrade to a better pair of speakers. And what we said to them was, no, maybe the better thing would be that you spend the money on a little bit of treating in the room and get that done, because you'll see a lot more from that. You'll have a lot more to learn from that, or to your ears enjoy with that, than actually buying another pair of speakers, which you might be disappointed with what happens if you're in the same space. Okay, do we have any more questions, or do we run out of time? What's our status there, Thomas?
I would say, if anybody has any final questions, drop them in the chat here on Zoom, or if you're still tuning in on YouTube, which, thanks to everybody that's over there. We got some good viewership there. But people are basically talking about headphones being a good option, like you had mentioned. I agree. I think headphones are really valuable, especially depending on what you have access to in terms of speakers and playing music loud. But I think that pretty much will do it. Was there anything else you wanted to
Well,
leave
let
with?
me just surmise everything. I mean, just to understand that when you get into the audio engineer mindset, it's definitely not the same as when you're in the producer mindset, and that you have to learn to morph into this, if you can, or just switch into this other personality or person. Things like things like phase cancellations, that become a priority, filtering versus EQ, and learning how to use that. Even things like how you treat reverb, and how engineers use reverb in a more subtle way than it's not used in a dramatic way. Usually, an engineer, you use reverb to just smoothen out things, and not even one of an old friend of mine it's a engineer, told me that the best way to use reverb is in a way that nobody can tell you used it, which is, that's how engineers think. And they also speak a certain jargon. Learn the jargon. The jargon is very important. Like, learn what a hertz is, what amplitude is, what decibels are, what phase is, the correct use of the filter types and EQ patterns. Learn about metering. About the scales you use, DBFS, LUFS, DBVU. What are all these things about? And if you want to learn, come to us. Go to one of my classes. This is all we do. Um, Learn about the resonance and its effect on you. Learn about phase cancellations and how it happens in every space you're in, and how it happens inside your mix. Learn about sibilance. Learn about psychoacoustics. Learn about managing dynamic range. Learn about the implication of the Haas effect, and things of that sort. I mean, so much to talk about. And Hopefully I could see you guys in one of my classes, and maybe I've seen some of you in my classes already, and you know what I'm talking about, because I'm drilling this stuff like crazy to try to switch. And my aim is to like have a new person at the end of my class where they now feel like, whoa, I can't go back. I can't ever think the way that I used to think anymore. That we think now like engineers, or at least have the ability to switch into that engineer mindset. And I guess that will be that's enough. Or maybe if there's a question, I can answer it. But
Cool. And just touching upon what Abe was mentioning, he is teaching our courses here, our mixing courses more specifically, and as well as some other production stuff. So if anybody out there is interested in checking out, what we have to offer in terms of our 12 session courses, we've got weekend workshops, and of course we're doing a bunch of live streams. Just check out 343labs.com. I just put it in the Zoom chat, and I'm also going to put my email, just Thomas at 343labs. If you guys have any questions, please reach out to me. But we did have one. It's a pretty complex question, but I think it's a good one to end on, Abe. So I'm gonna leave you with it, and I just want you to give me the most simplified version of the answer you can. This might be tough.
I can be very verbose about things, but go ahead.
This is from Jacob here in Zoom. So thank you, Jacob. He's saying, what are the major steps you would typically go through when mixing a track from start to finish? Which that's actually the name of our mixing course, which is funny, from start to finish. But I know that is kind of hard to answer in terms of, different styles of tracks, different stuff going on. But if you give us a really
Well,
simple,
okay, so it really depends, first of all, on if you're the one mixing the track or if you're just jumping cold into the situation because somebody sent you something to mix.
Mhm.
So the steps, are going to be the evaluation process about what it is that you're facing as a job, and how you're going to attack this. So it might take a few listens, and I might listen while I'm doing something else and just play it and start jotting down ideas. Uh, Listening to reference tracks, of course, to try to see how we can make this bridge, as I said. And then once we get to that to work, we're going to start with the tedious stuff, which is the reductive EQ, the four considerations that I say. There's always a reductive EQ. Then if it's been newly recorded material, it has to be compressed somehow. Maybe not as much as some other things, if depending on how much dynamic range you want to manage there. But then after that, then we do some balancing, and then the balance will happen usually based on a low frequency element like a kick or 808, which or some low bass line like in a jazz trio. I would probably use the upright bass as like, because that has the most girth, it has the most amplitude, it has the most energy. So I'll use that as a way to kind of set that in the mix, maybe around -10 for a peak, and then kind of balance everything revolving or orbiting that, so we could continue to keep headroom. Then once we balance that, then we could start, again, moving back and forth between reference tracks, always moving back and forth between reference tracks, and then start to see how we can start to deal with, at that point usually is where I like to enhance things, enhance the quality of certain parts. I like to now find nice space for everything in the spectrum. I mean, not in the spectrum, but in the panorama. I like to take advantage of the Haas effect, because that's like an extra hidden dimension in your track, which you can suddenly now expand into. It's like I like to say that, like, using the Haas effect for at least one element in your track, like putting something in Haas, usually it's like finding a closet in your house that you never knew you had, and it's suddenly like, whoa, it's a walk-in closet I never knew I had. And it's like, if you don't use the Haas effect at least on one little element, you're going to miss out on that space, because it really kind of is another dimension. And a lot of times when I have trouble like mixing two things together, I'll put one of them in the Haas effect, and then the problem is gone away, because they're, even though they're covering the same part of the frequency spectrum, the Haas effect tends to put things to the side, and the other one kind of stays in the center, and then you're like, oh, right, cool. Then once all of that's done, then the mastering process starts slowly. It like kind of melds into, like, you have to start thinking about how it's going to react to taking the whole track and limiting it, and maybe taking the whole track or compressing it, or taking the whole track and EQing it together, and seeing what the reactions are as you start to use your tools. And if you find that the reactions are a little bit unexpected, you might want to go back into the mixing part of it and kind of adjust there, so that you can further better tweak out what happens in the mastering part. So the mixing and the mastering part kind of go right into each other, and then you go through all the needs and operations that you have to go through in the mixing and the mastering part to kind of match your target of what you're trying to achieve. And then that's, in a nutshell, what happens through the mixing process.
awesome, awesome. And one more quick one before we leave you
Sure,
is
no problem.
I just jumped in and said, do you balance the bass and kick first?
Yeah. That's a of course, I always start with the lowest element, and then I work my way to like the next lowest element. So if it's a, say, house music, right? It'd be the kick, because it has the most punch and it really has the most gravitas, right? But then the next element would probably be the bass line, because it's supposed to play nice with the kick. But if you look at the combination in house music, let's say, and I don't want to be a part of one particular genre, but I'm just using that as an example. But if you take the kick and the bass in house music, the kick obviously has priority. So you might want to side chain the bass to the kick, so that that it gets out of the way of the kick as it's doing its thing. Uh, Further beyond that, then the next thing you might want to do is go to like the next girthy element. That might be a snare, depending on your mix, or it might be some some chords or something like that. Usually around that time is when I start to first think about if I have vocals to add in the vocals into the process. So that's the next part of the whole process.
Awesome, awesome. And so I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you everybody who's here in Zoom with us and also watching on YouTube
Right.
for
I see you, Elton. Elton's one of my students. He's in my mixing and mastering class that's going on Saturdays. I see you there, and I hope you're ready because Elton's promised me an amazing track to play on Saturday and to mix down on Saturday.
Yes,
So
yes.
I hope you're ready with that one.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
I'll send it to you. I can even send it to you tomorrow. It's already ready.
all right, right on.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
So and hopefully I'll see if I haven't seen you in my mixing classes. I hope to see you in one of my mixing classes very soon.
Yes, certainly.
definitely. All right, thanks
All
everybody.
right. Thanks.
If you miss any of the show, it's going to be available on our YouTube page, just youtube.com/343labs. Give us a like and subscribe. We're approaching 5K subscribers. We're really excited about that. But that's it. That's all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Abe, for the time. Busy day streaming, 2 streams, but we appreciate you, man.
All right. Thanks.
All right, take it easy, everybody.
Bye, everybody.